All right. Thank you all for joining us today for the South Texas Regional Family Medicine Grand Rounds. Next slide, please. Here's the CME code for today. I'll leave this up here for a bit so you can all claim your CME credit. All right, next slide, please. This is just information regarding the AAFP credit system. Next slide, please. And these are the core competencies of the Grand Rounds will address. Next slide, please. Here's a brief introduction from Dr. Shi.
Sorry, apologies. I forgot to unmute my phone. Hello, everyone, for our grand rounds for August. So today we have the pleasure of Dr. Vidya Sharma, who is a faculty at UTSA. So with a diverse background in community and clinical and food service management, Dr. Sharma is dedicated to research and community engagement projects that aim to improve nutrition among vulnerable populations in South Texas. Like I mentioned, Dr. Sharma is assistant professor of practice. She teaches nutrition and dietetics courses to undergraduate and graduate students. Dr. Sharma is also a licensed dietitian in the state of Texas, registered dietitian to correct myself, RD, and she's also a certified diabetes education care specialist. I think Dr. Sharma also have two additional team members she want to introduce to the group here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for the kind introduction. And thank you for inviting us to kind of speak about the topic. I also wanted to introduce our team members. So we have Dr. Sarah Masood. She's an assistant professor at UT Health with the School of Nursing. And we have Caitlin Sangdal. She's the research coordinator for SORNet, which is the practice-based research network and for older adults. And again, they'll be talking about this more towards the end of the session. And then I don't think I need to introduce Dr. Davila, but as part of this project, we have had the pleasure of working with Dr. Davila as well. So I was being very creative today, and I tried to create poll questions through Zoom. But for some reason, it's not giving me the option to display any poll questions. So I'm just going to go over with the slide and hopefully gather some responses from the chat. So I just want to get started by asking, how many of y'all have experience providing care to patients with poor cognitive health? You can just type your responses in the chat box, yes, no. And I know I was told at the beginning by Catherine that there is a group. It's a large audience room where everybody is sitting together. So I know there are a lot more individuals, residents sitting in the room, but I'm understanding that most of you all probably have experience in terms of working with older adults and providing cognitive care. How about providing care to patients? But okay, so Aline says that at times. How about thinking about providing care from a nutrition focus or a nutrition perspective? How confident do you all feel that you all have the required knowledge and resources in terms of educating your patients from a nutrition focus? I'll take any responses in the chat. Okay. So Dr. Shi says less frequent and less confident. Dr. Ramos says minimal. And I know every time we used to meet with Dr. Davila, that's the one thing that she always used to say, that how much ever education we can get about nutrition is um, always a plus point, because that's something that's never really talked about a lot. We focus so much on the clinical aspect. Okay, awesome. So I'm just going to just briefly talk about the learning objectives. So again, here, not delving too much into the link between nutrition and brain health, kind of just a brief overview talking about the risk factors for dementia, focusing on some cultural considerations in terms of diet and programs available to address food insecurity. And then we'll focus a little bit more on different lifestyle intervention strategies for the older adult population. So I think for all of y'all who have worked and provided care to older adults, this is not something that is very new or very alarming, but this is basically a map of the United States, and it shows the county level prevalence of Alzheimer's disease across the US. And you see the shading, which represents overall prevalence rates. So wherever you see light gray color, that basically indicates prevalence less than 7%. And where you see the dark gray colors here on the map, that's basically indicating prevalence of over 15%. Something very interesting and very alarming is that Texas stands out actually with the most counties in the top 25 for Alzheimer's prevalence, and this is particularly more amongst the minority population. And then again, basically it reflects the racial and ethnic disparities. And when I had done this presentation previously as part of a study, that was the first time I had heard about Star County. And not that I'm not aware of areas, more towards the border, but it was very alarming to notice that it actually has the highest overall prevalence throughout the country. And the overall prevalence of Alzheimer's is at 23.2%. And if you look at the map, again, you can see like states like, for example, Colorado, they have a very low prevalence, which is kind of the light gray, less than 7%. So I'm just going to start by talking about why nutrition really matters. And I think everybody, when you all graduate, when you all take the oath, we all know about the founder, but this is something that has come from him in terms of let food be your medicine and medicine be your food. And again, not to say that medications are not important, but I think a lot of the problems or a lot of the issues can really be addressed when people focus more on food, more on lifestyle, which kind of never seemed to be a big problem a couple decades ago. But I think, as we are starting to, we are in that trend with more modernization and more technology. I think we lead a busy life, but we don't really pay a lot of attention to what we really consume. Convenience is really what dictates our food choices nowadays. So kind of starting up, to delve into the topic on why nutrition matters. I really like this slide. It's actually an image from a publication from a Canadian research group. And what I really like about this is that it clearly kind of shows you the left half is basically, an ideal case scenario where people consume good foods, good nutrients. And on the right-hand side is what kind of choices predispose us to more poor cognitive health. So when you look at the left-hand side, you notice that the brain's plasticity is kind of maintained. And obviously, this is kind of more in tune if people choose more healthy foods. So for example, we have PUFAS. PUFAS is polyunsaturated fatty acids. So now the question is, okay, where do I get polyunsaturated fatty acids? Typically, any kind of plant-based, liquid plant-based oil is a source of polyunsaturated fatty acids. So that could be like, for example, nuts, It could be seeds. All those are examples of polyunsaturated fatty acids. Then we also have MUFAs, which are monounsaturated fatty acids. And again, I think if we really look into the structure of fatty acids, which is something that most of us have studied as part of organic chemistry, it makes a lot of sense. But a classic example of a monounsaturated fatty acid is olive oil. Then we have the omega-3s and the omega-6s. So again, these are basically the ones that act as antioxidants. So again, for people who consume fatty fish especially, they do get bountiful of the omegas. However, if people are strict vegans or vegetarians, flax seeds, walnuts, these are wonderful sources of these fatty acids, and they are what are called as essential fatty acids, which is basically something that our body absolutely needs, but the body doesn't have a way to make it. So if you don't get it from your diet, you're going to be depriving your body of those essential fatty acids, and they are required for several important body functions. And then the Mediterranean diet, the classic Mediterranean diet, which is basically rich in fish, rich in nuts, olives, whole grains. So again, that's always been kind of one of the healthier diets. So why do these things matter? One, because when you include these kind of choices, they do help to lower inflammation overall. They also increase the proportion of something called as BDNF, which is actually a brain protecting protein. It's called as brain derived neurotrophic factor, and it actually helps in protects and maintains the nerve cells. And then, of course, regular exercise. So again, looking at any form of physical activity is always great. And then we have different kinds of polyphenols, antioxidants. So for example, if you're doing a lot of berries, if you're doing, red wine in moderation, if you're doing tea in moderation, again, all those things, they definitely help. Now, on the right side is what you see when, someone is predisposing themselves to poor cognitive health, dementia, or Alzheimer's eventually. So this is where you're looking at more consumption of saturated fatty acids. And I always tell my students that the easiest way to remember saturated is any fat that is solid in consistency is a saturated fatty acid. So thinking about butter, thinking about lard, these are all examples of saturated fatty acid. They stay solid at room temperature. And then simple carbohydrates. So you're looking more at refined grains. This is basically anything which does not have added fiber. So when you're looking at white bread, white rice, anything that is refined, that's basically predisposing to, more inflammation and more predisposition to cognitive related issues. Sedentary lifestyle, of course, which I think, people are kind of, with the technology and things like that, its lifestyle has become such that people are running around, but not necessarily active. So most of the times that concept of calorie in equal to calorie out is non-existent. For most people, it's mostly people consume more, but they are not burning equivalent to what they consume. And then, of course, if people are overweight, obese, if they have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, consuming a lot of processed, ready-to-eat foods, most of them have a lot of trans fat. And I don't know how many of y'all are aware, but I just want to throw in over there, trans fat is something that is actually man-made. It does not exist in nature. In nature, what we really have is either you have the polyunsaturated, monounsaturated fats, or you have the saturated fat. Trans fat is something that, we develop because what happens is, let's say, for example, you slice up some potatoes and you fry them in oil. Oil, just like apples, it has a tendency that if you leave it outside, it gets oxidized. And when it gets oxidized, then food starts to smell bad, it starts to taste bad. Now, imagine those, all these manufacturers, they make a big bag of chips. And, you open the bag and you want the bag of chips, you clip it on, and then you want it to stay fresh for a little bit longer. If it's made in normal oil, it doesn't stay fresh for too long. So what we did is we took a normal, healthy plant-based oil and we chemically modified it to create what is called as trans fat. So what it does is it prevents the oil from getting bad, from getting rancid. If any of y'all have watched this YouTube, it's a short YouTube video. It's called Super Size Me. It was like several years ago. There was this person in New York who did this experiment where he compared homemade fries to McDonald's fries. Again, nothing against McDonald's, but he basically compared, and you can see that if McDonald's fries, if it falls, like you're munching in your car and accidentally a couple fries fall down, you may be vacuuming your car after 6 months and the fries is still looking fine. It's not moldy, which does not happen when you normally make it at home, right? That's where trans fat is. And the labels have made it mandatory that trans fats need to be listed in the nutrition label. But if it is below a certain percentage, you can still list it as 0 milligram of trans fat. So something important to note. I'm just going to jump into this big study called the Lancet study. And I know the image may look a little bit smaller, and I think Catherine has the slides, and she can share it with you all. But mainly this figure here, it summarizes the 2024 update from the Lancet Commission on dementia prevention, intervention, and care. And on the left-hand side, you can see that it's basically identified as 14 modifiable risk factors, which means things which are really under our control. And they are really split into early life, midlife, and then you have, late life. So early life, again, you can see this one that looks, the teal colored circle. It's about 5% of it, which is mostly related to low education. And believe it or not, that does play a big important role, because you want to make sure that people have access to education, because it's not just for cognitive development, but it's also for long-term brain health. What we really want to focus on is this middle circle here, the yellow or the peachish kind of circle. This is actually the most critical period with the largest number of modifiable risk factors. Again, modifiable means those are all under our control. We can do something about it. Two new things that were added in this, where one is related to hearing loss. And the other was high LDL cholesterol. Again, when people consume a lot of processed foods, a lot of fried foods, artificially processed foods, then that increases their risk for high LDL cholesterol. These are two new risk factors that were added. But other than that, there is depression, there is trauma, there is high blood pressure, there is obesity. And then finally, in late life is where one of the biggest things that I think is very important is focusing on social isolation, which contributes a significant 5% of dementia risk, which is why this blue color circle that you see, it's focused more on community support, social engagement, and addressing loneliness in older adults. And then this is another very big multi-domain lifestyle modification study. It's called the Worldwide Fingers Initiative. It's actually a Finnish study, and it's a global network of clinical trials that focuses on dementia prevention. But the most important component over here is you can see that simultaneously the trials have been conducted in different parts of the world. But on the right-hand side, you see that it's multi-domain, in the sense that there is focus on diet, there is focus on physical activity, there is focus on vascular and metabolic monitoring. So kind of looking at your blood lipid panels, looking at social activity, and looking at cognitive training. The idea is all of these have to kind of blend in together at the same time. So when I'm looking at lifestyle modification today, I should not just be saying, oh, I'm going to change my diet. It's also important to incorporate some amount of physical activity, incorporate some amount of, maybe puzzles, maybe crosswords, maybe something that will challenge our brain. Maybe it could be reading, as simple as that. But at the same time, monitoring our, clinical labs and those parameters as well. Um, Again, kind of looking at that same worldwide finger study, but this is just a kind of a summary of what happened with what the observations were. And you can see that with healthy lifestyle, as what was observed as part of this study was that there is overall 25% increase in cognition, about 150% plus increase in executive function, 40% plus increase in memory function. There's also a significant increase in the brain processing power. And obviously, when people are making changes in all that, it also lowers the risk for a lot of chronic diseases. So hopefully that kind of gives a little bit of understanding of why nutrition and what studies have that really validate the fact that nutrition is the key. So I'm just going to first start by this very basic my plate. For most of you all who have studied here in the United States, you're probably familiar with something called the my pyramid. So when you were in school, maybe elementary school, middle school, you would see there was a pyramidal kind of structure and then different colors. Each color represented a certain food group. But then the problem is that when I'm looking at the pyramid and it says, oh, you should eat more grains, more fruits, more veggies, and the tip of the pyramid should be a very minimal, which means like salt, sugar, oils. But I don't know how to translate that to my plate, right? Like I don't know how to fix my plate. So that's when in 2010, the USDA changed it to something called the My Plate. So my plate is more like a visual tool. So if I want to fix my plate today, if I look at this, it tells me, oh, this is how my plate should be. Now, that doesn't mean I'm always eating on a plate. It could be maybe a sandwich, maybe it could be a wrap, it could be anything like that. But the idea is half of our plate should be filled with non-starchy vegetables and fruits. And when I say non-starchy, corn and potatoes do not count under that category. So most people think that, oh, if I eat some potatoes, that will fill that bucket. No, it doesn't, because potatoes are starchy. Again, that doesn't mean you don't eat it, but you can see here this quarter, which includes grains. This is where you would include your potatoes. This is where you would include your corn, or your bread, rice, pasta, any of those things. When you look at the left hand, when you look at the half the plate filled with non-starchy vegetables and fruits, so fruits typically fresh fruits are great. Frozen is also great. I tell most of my patients, if you can and if it works for you, you can always buy frozen fruits, and same thing for frozen vegetables. In fact, there is a lot of research that says that frozen fruits and vegetables are actually much better than fresh fruits or vegetables. The reason being they are packed when their nutrients are at their peak nutritive value. As long as you keep them in the right temperature range, they are actually much better off. And then, you can also do dried fruits, so raisins, apricots, and then, for your the other quarter, which is your grains and potatoes. Most people assume that if the bread looks brown in color and if it says wheat bread, it's actually wheat bread, right? Like I'm doing fine. But if it just says wheat bread and it looks brown in color, it's actually white bread mixed with molasses to give the brown color. That's the same for honey split top wheat bread as well. So if really someone needs to consume, whole grains, so to say, they should really look at 100% whole wheat or whole grain or multi-grain breads, not just look at wheat bread, not just look at the color. And you don't need to go for fancy Pepperidge Farms or, any of those. Again, it's all a question of affordability. If you feel like that's the best thing for you, and if you can, if your wallet allows you to, then that's fine. But otherwise, the store brand version is equally fine. Most of the times it's the same factory that probably makes for both, but we end up paying because some of the more pricier brands have to show their commercials so that people are more aware of their brands. And then the other quarter mainly includes all your protein sources. So again, looking at lean protein, looking at nuts, seeds. We want to focus on that, especially with older adults. That's very important because there's more risk for frailty, muscle loss, things like that. And then with physical activity, again, we can never, undermine the importance of physical activity. So again, the goal is at least have 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity, or it could be 75 minutes of vigorous intensity activity. Considering that we are working with the older adult population, it's also important to have some kind of weight bearing or strengthening activities. At least 2 times per week is a good idea. And then flexibility exercises, balance exercises, kind of do it as often as possible. If someone cannot do it, I tell them that, Planet Fitness has, not Planet Fitness, Senior Planet actually has a lot of free online videos that, people can watch. Similarly, YouTube has chair exercise videos. Again, the most important thing is always check with the provider to make sure that it's okay for them to get engaged in those activities. So kind of taking a deep dive into some of those evidence-based diets. So we kind of started with the very basic My Plate recommendations, which is like, make sure everything is in proportion, make sure things are balanced, and you're looking at portion sizes. This is, again, I really like this image, which is from another publication. And it actually kind of, wherever you see the plus sign, it basically indicates that, when people consume more of those diets, it increases their risk for cognitive decline. And on the other hand, wherever you see the minus sign, it basically indicates that you're lowering your risk for cognitive problems. So again, healthy diet, like a perfect My Plate diet, that's wonderful. A DASH diet is what is called as dietary approaches to stopping hypertension. So this is it's basically like a My Plate diet, but you're focusing and making sure that you're reducing your consumption of added sodium. And then, something very interesting that I always tell people is the recommendations actually say that, you need to consume sodium which should be less than 2,300 milligrams per day. And when I tell a normal person 2,300 milligrams, that seems like a very big number. But believe it or not, when you translate it to teaspoons or tablespoons, 2,300 milligrams is actually just 1 teaspoon. So think about how much sodium people consume from morning until bedtime. And how, for sure, in a lot of individuals, that definitely increases their risk for high blood pressure. This is again from another publication, but I like this Venn diagram because it kind of shows 3 very healthy diets. So again, you have your Mediterranean diet, which is focused more on poly and unsaturated fats, nuts and fish. And then you have your classic plant-based diet, which of course the biggest benefit with a plant-based diet is that it really promotes the growth of the gut microbiome. And from all the research that we have today, we know that, the gut microbiome plays a big role even in terms of our overall cognitive health. And then you have the DASH diet, which again is like a classic My Plate diet, but mainly focusing on cutting down sodium. And you can see in between, the common thing amongst all of them is consuming more fruits, consuming more vegetables, consuming more lean meats, which is basically the the thing that really is common amongst all of them. This is not just the only publication. There are several more publications, but I just wanted to kind of just give a brief summary of something that I found very interesting. So your Medi diet is basically the Mediterranean diet. This is just a systematic review which was published in Frontiers in Nutrition. And basically what was found is that when participants, when they adhered to the Mediterranean diet, it was associated with lower risk of mild cognitive impairment. There was also better working memories And also, it was found that the Mediterranean diet could actually reduce the risk of Alzheimer's by 29%, which is, I think that's a very significant percentage. Again, the images might look a little small, but again, the main focus here is to understand that when you're comparing, this was again another study that was published, which was comparing mind diet versus a control diet. And the control diet really did not focus on, it was just normal, like no specific modifications made to the lifestyle. Whereas on the mind diet, the mind is actually a combination of the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet. So again, just to summarize, Mediterranean is including lean meats, a lot of monounsaturated fats, nuts, seeds, and oils, and then your whole grains. And then your DASH diet is kind of focusing more on low sodium and weight loss if people are overweight. So when you're looking at those things, you see that overall, cognitive decline was much less in individuals who, in terms of adverse events, it was much less with individuals who followed the mind diet versus the control diet. This is one thing actually I'm very guilty of. So I'm actually a vegetarian. I'm a lacto-ovo vegetarian. So it's not that I'm a total vegan. And I have been, you go for your routine once a year checkup, and I have been told that I'm deficient with vitamin B12, which actually is very common in people who are vegetarians or vegans. You actually get a bountiful of vitamin B12 from animal-based sources compared to plant-based. But what happens is, and same thing for folate or folic acid, but what happens is when people are deficient in vitamin B12 and folate, what it does is in our body, it increases the level of homocysteine. And when homocysteine levels increase in the body, then it actually impairs cognitive functions like, for example, memory, attention, processing speed. In fact, high homocysteine levels have actually also been correlated to the white matter abnormalities and also increased risk of silent brain infarction. So this was, again, I really liked this because I felt it was so much relevant more to me. Sometimes they say practice what you preach, and I have to remind myself to take my vitamin B12 pill every time. But again, there is a strong correlation between vitamin B12 levels, folate, and multivitamin supplements. So again, if you do find individuals, and actually I also wanted to mention that people who are deficient with folate or folic acid, something very interesting is that I can get folate or folic acid by eating a lot of green leafy vegetables, but in our body, the folic acid that you get from supplements is actually better digested and absorbed and better assimilated in the body than the natural folic acid. So it's kind of one of those situations where, if somebody says, oh, I want to take a multivitamin, and, if that addresses their folic acid, that's actually better because the folic acid from that supplement will actually be better utilized in the body. Statin use, again, not going too much in depth, but again, I think we can see the correlation clearly over here because when individuals' arteries are clogged, obviously it affects the blood supply. So, individuals who are prescribed statins, and again, it has its own share of side effects and things like that, but the main goal is to make sure that we are managing their blood lipid levels, as in that focusing on reducing their LDL and triglyceride levels and making sure that their high density lipoprotein or HDL levels are increased. So again, this was another study that was done, and basically what was found is that when people take an average of 1 daily dose of statin for a year, the statin users had 0.21 more mini mental state points as compared to those who did not use statin. Again, this is only if statin is necessary because their cholesterol levels are high. And then if they were taking it for 3 years, the benefits were much more over a sustained period of time. So I'm just going to quickly jump into something very important because we keep talking about food, 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 and we keep talking about nutrition. But the biggest problem is that we don't talk about food insecurity. The surprising fact is that it's very easy for me as a dietitian to tell people, you should choose this, and don't eat this. But the reality is, when you go shopping, all those foods that we say try not to eat more of, those are the ones that are cheaper for the wallet, and the ones that are healthy are the ones that are more expensive. So because we work with patients who may not necessarily be able to afford all the food, so to say, that we want them to eat. I just wanted to talk about food insecurity a little bit. So when you think of food security, the USDA basically defines food insecurity as a lack of consistent access to enough food for an active, healthy life. So if someone has to ration out, if someone has to spread out their supplies to make sure that 10 people in the family are able to eat the meals, and they have to maybe cut down on how much they could eat per meal or maybe skip a meal, that's all classified as food insecurity. Why do we need to talk about it? So again, this is focused on San Antonio, but this slide is from San Antonio. But when we are looking at that, pretty much that first slide that I showed with Starr County having like a 23.2% prevalence, I think it's important to keep that into perspective, that the effects are far more out there in those counties. So here in Bexar County, based on 2022 data from Feeding America, San Antonio has higher rates of poverty, about 20%, and food insecurity, which is about 17.4%, as compared to the entire state of Texas, which is just about 13%. And this is especially more prevalent with racial and ethnic minority groups and with older adults. Something important to also remember is that a significant proportion of San Antonio households, they also depend on one of the programs called as SNAP. And I do understand and recognize that, a lot of these programs, their eligibility in the recent days and, what is covered, what is not covered has changed. But I think it's still important to know what those programs are. So why do we need to really care? Because when older adults have food insecurity, they are at risk for malnutrition, different deficiencies, and chronic diseases. So kind of looking at different programs, again, in the interest of time, I just want to spend just a little bit of time going through each program. So the first biggest program is Supplemental Nutrition Assistance, called SNAP. This used to be called food stamps before. It's one of the largest programs available, but then there are eligibility criteria. So if people don't meet the eligibility criteria, then they wouldn't qualify for SNAP. Even though it is one of the largest programs, especially among older adults, it is still an underutilized program. Then we have the Congregate Meal Program and Meals on Wheels. Congregate Meal Program, it can be done, it's offered at different church locations, the senior centers here in San Antonio in Bexar County, and it's basically where healthy food, especially lunch, is offered at the meals. It's prepared, ready to eat. But the main thing with Congregate Meal Program is it focuses on socialization. So when older adults go to those sites, they are not just getting to eat healthy, they also have access to different exercise equipments. They can play bingo, they can play pickleball, they can play, they can learn how to type on the computer. There are a lot of things out there which really help to strengthen cognitive health. And then Meals on Wheels is another option. So if somebody cannot go to a congregate meal, or if somebody has some kind of a limitation, if they cannot cook, maybe something happened and the kitchen is no longer accessible, then they can be referred to the Meals on Wheels program, where healthy meals get dropped off to their houses. They do need referrals from the provider, but really anybody can refer, but they will contact the provider to make sure that the individual qualifies. Then we have the emergency food assistance program. So this is like, for example, if someone comes and says that, I don't have food to eat, you can direct them to the San Antonio Food Bank, and basically they get a basket which has a mixture of some perishable foods, some non-perishable foods. It's more of trying to fix the immediate problem, but for long term, you do have to look if they qualify for any of the other programs. Commodity supplemental food program, a lot of older adults actually qualify, and the food bank actually is they have so many older adults who take advantage of this program that they now have a wait list, and people have to sign up on the wait list, and then when an opening comes up, then they will qualify. But basically they get about 30 to 40 pounds per month of a big basket. This is actually something they can either go and pick it up at the food bank if they are able to, or it can get dropped off at a senior center and they just pick it up from there. And again, it includes a mixture of perishable and non-perishable foods. Seniors farmers market is just during the spring and early summer. So it actually starts March and ends October 31st. So as long as they qualify, they get a $50 voucher that they can, you cannot redeem this at any farmers market. You have to go to designated locations. And again, $50 may not seem like a lot, but it is quite a bit for individuals where it does help them. So I just wanted to provide a brief overview. And again, this is not all, but these are some of the large programs that we have here. So why are there so many issues in terms of food insecurity, even though we have all these programs? So one is eligibility criteria is a big hassle. Like not everybody qualifies for every program, so that could be a problem. Documentation requirements, maybe they require a bank statement, maybe they require a pay slip, things that they are not able to provide. There is an application process. Just because somebody gets a debit card through the food stamp to buy supplies every month doesn't mean you're covered for life. Once a year, you still have to get recertified. You have to go back to the food bank, or you have to call the helpline number and you have to get recertified. Lack of transportation. It could also be language and cultural barriers. Sometimes it's just that I don't know if they can speak my language. Sometimes it's just that, oh, if I go to the store and if I use this SNAP debit card, if there are people around me, maybe they will judge me, and it doesn't feel nice to me. In my culture, it almost makes it seem like I'm being dependent on someone and I'm asking for help, and I don't like it. Or it could be something as simple as lack of cooking equipment and storage. And then these are some other resources. And I see a couple messages here in the chat, and I will be happy to talk about that. I just want to make sure in the interest of time, I finish up with the slides, and then I'll definitely get back to that sleep question. These are some more. There's one is Community First Food Pantry. So the Community First is actually the health insurance plan that's offered through University Health. And they actually they almost look like mailboxes, and they are stationed in different areas in San Antonio. And basically they kind of look like mailboxes, but we'll say on the outside Community First Food Pantry, and they are stocked up with different kinds of non-perishable foods, not perishable foods. And basically anybody who cannot afford, they can open that box and they can grab a bag. St. Winnie's Bistro is another place. They have specific requirements, but if you know of someone who's hosting like a big party and they have a lot of food left over, as long as the food meets the certain criteria, they can, St. Winnie's Bistro, either they'll come and pick it up or it can be dropped off, and then maybe, someone else can be fed that same meal. Then there is also Project Hope, which is specifically for older adults through the San Antonio Food Bank. And then there is Fresh Track, which is also another program. Some other community support, initiatives. So one is Meal Train. So again, if you have leftovers, kind of passing it on to someone. So there is a designated site where you can say that, okay, I have this food left over. Maybe if someone needs it, they can pick it up. These are transportation services, and I'm sure you all are all aware, but sometimes it's just a gentle reminder that if someone cannot make it to certain locations, The Via has the transit system, there's the Ride Connect, there's also carpool ride share. And just a quick overview on cultural considerations. Since we are talking so much about nutrition, I enjoy my Indian food so much that sometimes I find it difficult to kind of adjust my taste buds if I'm offered something that is slightly different, right? So I'm sure that's the same thing for everybody. That doesn't mean I'm not open to other cultures or I'm not open to experimenting and trying different foods. But, I think we all have certain things that we associate ourselves with. So looking at predominantly the Latino population, trying to promote black beans, pinto beans, lentils, canned foods always go on sale and there are plenty of coupons. If somebody wants to stock up, that's fine. The only problem with canned foods is that sometimes they have a lot of sodium in them. So again, if they do buy the cans, make sure they throw away that water and rinse the contents under running tap water so that that extra salt gets washed away. So not just opening the can and putting it straight into the pot or pan. Whole grains, again, brown rice doesn't always work. I myself have challenges, getting used to brown rice because it doesn't chew or taste the same way as white. But again, maybe if somebody is eating a lot of tacos or things like that, we can have them swap their refined grain or the flour tortilla with maybe whole wheat or corn tortillas. That's probably a better choice. And then fruits and vegetables. So again, avocados, that's wonderful. It has a lot of healthy fats, polyunsaturated fats. So that's actually great. Mangoes, papaya, great antioxidants. I think, using a lot of herbs and spices to kind of help with the sodium also really helps. And then lean protein. And then just cooking methods. So again, kind of grilling, roasting, steaming, flavoring with herbs and spices. Mrs. Dash is a branded one, but there are store-bought versions as well. They have no salt, no sodium. There's the 21 spice combination. So again, using more of that certainly helps. Family style meals, I think with people's busy lives, I think it's important to kind of emphasize a little bit on, especially when you're looking at cognitive health, when you're looking at that social connections, when you're looking at support system, family style meals, certainly it kind of helps to really make it a lot more balanced and more suitable. So something that we should encourage people to kind of really focus on. So I just want to wrap up with some takeaway findings and then, just to say that certainly diet is an important modifiable factor. Our brain does require a constant supply of fuel, which obviously comes from food. And if you remember that image where we talked about the plasticity of brains, what we eat, it does affect our brain structure. And it also affects our mood, which is why when we are happy, we resort to certain foods. When we are sad, we resort to certain foods. But again, always keep in mind the cultural background when you think about, promoting brain health. And my original slides actually had more content. It was also focused on vitamin D, the gut microbiome, but in the interest of time, I had to trim some of those slides. And I know Dr. Andre asked about exercise and diet health. And that was actually one of the slides where I had talked about sleep and stress. So we all, it's important to make sure that people understand that, sleep is as important. Cutting down on stress, again, easier said than done. But, when people have the minimum, the hours of sleep, that does affect a lot in terms of brain function. And I'm as guilty as many others, but I've always been told that, after dusk is where you need to focus on melatonin because it really helps with overall health, improves cognition. But I think sometimes we get so glued to the devices that it seems like even if it's 11 o'clock and you hear a sound like it's an email, you feel like the world will come to an end if you don't check your email right away. So again, I think it's important to understand that, when you're looking at lifestyle, it's focused on diet, physical activity, sleep, looking at hydration, looking at cognitive, just engaging your brain. They all in all, they work together in order to improve our overall cognitive health. These are some references, and I'll be happy to take more questions. But before I pass it on to Dr. Sarah Masood and Caitlin, I did want to mention that the content from these slides, we actually, as part of one of the studies, which was funded through the IIMS, we did a pilot study which was focused on kind of evaluating clinicians' overall self-efficacy. So it was a 4-week Zoom sessions once a week that we provided. And the content that is being shared today is actually tidbits from each of those 4 Zoom sessions. And Dr. Davila really shared a lot, and she was actually she was a co-I for the grant, and she did share a lot of valuable feedback. We used the Project Echo model, and she did, as a geriatrician, she provided a lot of valuable feedback in terms of those sessions. So I just wanted to share that. I forgot to mention that previously, but I'm now going to pass it on to Dr. Sarah Masood and Caitlin Sangdal, who will talk a little bit about SoarNet, and then after that, I'll be happy to answer more questions.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Sharma. That was an incredibly informative presentation. I think the comprehensiveness of your presentation is a wonderful example of the overall program, the Project Echo program that you were able to implement and study through our SoarNet infrastructure. And just to reiterate, the study that Dr. Sharma was able to lead with myself and Dr. Davila as co-investigators and Caitlin Sangdal as the research coordinator, was able to prove that participants did show statistically significant improvements in their confidence to promote brain health from a nutrition perspective. So really a lot of gratitude for her being able to generate this through the infrastructure of SoarNet, and to those who, some of you are on the call, who were able to participate in that study. So yeah, I want to share with you a bit about SoarNet, the Supporting Older Adults Through Research Network. We are a practice-based research network. I have the fortune to serve as director alongside Dr. Angelica Davila, where I can provide my research perspective, and Dr. Davila can provide also research perspective, but her clinical perspective to our community. I'll share a little bit more about our advisory board to give you a sense of what we do structurally. But SoarNet is a space basically for anybody, but particularly healthcare providers, patients, and researchers to connect with each other, to connect with our leadership team and advisory board, all around our shared interests to improve care for older adults through research, right? So quite a broad goal, but narrow enough to where we have overlapping perspectives and experiences and a population of interest. Membership to SoarNet is free. So once you're a member, the door is open to you for a few things. We do provide network updates, research updates, study updates, but more importantly, we're able to provide the scaffolding for your study ideas. Once you submit your member form, you will be provided a link to submit study ideas, study proposals, where you can request consultation with our leadership team. And our advisory board, which is comprised of caregivers, healthcare providers, currently providing and former providers, and researchers who can share their insights and convene as needed if you would like to receive some stakeholder and expert guidance on your proposals. So like many providers, maybe you have research ideas, but you don't know how to get it started. SoarNet is a space that can help you do that. We also invite more formal partnerships with SoarNet on grant applications. We can establish those through letters of support, working together on proposals to co-conduct studies, just like Dr. Sharma was able to do with SoarNet, where we, as a leadership team, played a very active role in the study from its conceptualization through the implementation and the dissemination. So you have that support and camaraderie with a team of researchers. So Oh, and I should mention Caitlin Sangdal is a critical component of our practice-based research network. She has the ability to provide her support on the administrative aspects of proposals too. So maybe you're worried about not being having a fully fledged research team. Within reason, we also have the support of a phenomenal researcher and research coordinator, Caitlin, on our SORNet team. So that's another major asset. So the QR code will take you to our form. I'll also pop in the chat a link to our website where you can follow updates on Dr. Sharma's study, our growing advisory board, and our growing member base. And once you submit a membership form, keep an eye out for an email with a link for that study submission form. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Masood. I see that Dr. Shi has asked a question on, can you comment on the MIND diet? Yes. So the MIND diet is a combination of the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet. So again, the Mediterranean diet focuses on including more lean meats and more fish, actually, which are a great source of omega-3 and omega-6s, the fatty acids. It also, and then also it focuses on nuts, again, good source of omega-3s. It does focus on, the nuts, oils. And then you have your DASH diet. DASH stands for dietary approaches to stopping hypertension. So like I mentioned, the classic My Plate diet, where you are including more non-starchy vegetables, more fruits, being cognizant of, how much starch or grains you consume, and then also focusing on lean proteins. But with the DASH diet, because it's focused on hypertension, the two important key components over there is cutting down sodium, cutting down salt. And again, salt can be it can be named differently. So, a lot of times, and salt is salt. It doesn't, just because you use Himalayan salt or you use iodized salt is salt. It's still sodium chloride. So, you still have to keep in mind that that will still increase the blood pressure. So it does focus on cutting down sodium, and it also focuses on weight loss, especially if someone is overweight or obese, because there is strong research that suggests that for every few pounds of weight that you lose, you actually lower your blood pressure points. So again, so the MIND diet is actually integrating both those diets together. And it's kind of like a classic healthy diet that you could eat, or you could encourage your patients to eat, not just for overall health, but also for, cognitive health. So that's basically what the MIND is. But because it's focused on cognition, it's called the MIND diet. But again, Mediterranean and DASH combined together. Any other questions? Dr. Davila, do we have a website for the 4 PowerPoints from Project Echo? Not yet. We are trying to figure out how to integrate all that. We haven't gotten to that point yet. So when we get to that, for sure, we will have more updates.
Perfect. Can I make just one comment real quick?
Yes.
And also, again, thank you, Dr. Sharma. I really appreciate it. And poor Dr. Sharma, I've been having her give presentations everywhere because I think it's such an important information for us. But I just wanted to make one comment in terms of, for older adults, right? Some of us may think, how am I going to change someone's diet at this point? How much does it really benefit at, when they're in their 60s or 70s? But as family medicine physicians, I really want us to be mindful that this is our opportunity to change generational, habits. So I tell my patients and their children caregivers, right? This is not just about how are we going to help mom or dad. This is about how we're going to help the children, the grandchildren, and continue to influence future generations in healthy eating and healthy lifestyles. Because if we don't start now, it's not going to happen anyway. So just wanted to throw that caveat out so that we're not only focusing on the patient, we're focusing on the family and the generation.
Absolutely. And that's why that family style meal is important, and understood that people's lives are busy. We don't necessarily have the time, but it's very important to understand that when you make a change, you're not just doing it for yourself, you're also impacting people around you. So you're not the only one to benefit. everybody will simultaneously benefit. And I think there is a lot more work to be done now because, because the diet is not, it's not nutrient dense, it's more energy dense right now. There is a big difference between the two. I can take a very simple potato and I can make it two different ways. I can bake the potato with the skin, eat that potato, and that becomes nutrient dense. But that same potato, when I make French fries out of it, now I make it energy dense. So, and then again, if you are, doing it from other places, then from outside places, then that's kind of more impacting, right? So I think it's important to understand that, food is medicine, medicine is food. Any other questions?
Well, thank you again, Dr. Sharma.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate the opportunity. And I think Catherine has the slides. So if you all are interested in learning more or if you all have any questions, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.